Hey guys, just back with the kind of initial sort of live stream slash video for FPL for this 2022-23 season. Exciting times, obviously, because we've already had a few big transfers and changes, especially with, I would say, the forward pricing being quite good. Seems like there is already an early template, mostly because, once again, defenders for me are, I think, too well priced. From an efficiency point of view, it seems like I would like to go for 5 defenders, but we all know early in the season people do lose clean sheets, especially City being one kind of case in point where we always see them have a slightly slow start to the season. But is it really worth missing out on being early on players like Cancelo, Laporte, those sorts of players? I can see people also valuing Ederson very highly. Same with Allison too, but Allison I think is just a weird one where um, I'll write all the initial drafts on Twitter, but I'm also happy to kind of just respond to YouTube messages as well. Anything in the YouTube chat. Henry, thank you so much for being a member for 8 months as a president as well. Vamos, congratulations to you for your wonderful Champions League league victory. Harold, so nice to see you as well. I've missed FPL actually. I've taken a bit of a break, so I haven't really made any videos lately. I will be doing a kind of fixture review very, very shortly, and I'll also be looking at just in general, I think from the cheat sheet point of view, the most price efficient players that I can see, as far as I can tell right now, even valuing a little bit players that are coming to the league, such as Perisic and so on and so forth. I do think a lot of people have opted to go defender wise to just go for Perisic, but realistic, I think if we can lock down and understand who might be the right wing back for Spurs, I'd be very happy to double up on Spurs early in the season. I just think their defenders were extremely valuable from the point of view that they attack so often, and you have that kind of guarantee with Conte, and also their just defensive solidity I think is there. I think Romero was quite a good defender near the back half of the season. Yes, they lack a little bit of depth, but it'll be interesting to see whether Longley kind of improves their defense. They had a great run near the end, and so many players had good runs as well. Hi Marcus, hi Janksta, really nice to see you around as well. Hi Anka. Hello again. Let that long month of agony begin. Absolutely. Doherty over Perisic any day. I mean, Doherty was fantastic, and I think the only issue obviously is if Jed Spence actually signs for Spurs. That's the only really thing preventing Doherty from being a good valuable pick. Like if Perisic is absurdly well priced, I'm not sure if I'm going to start the season with Cancelo. That might depend on whether City are actually able to kind of lock down Cucurella on the left, because I think that would add to a little bit of rotation, because I would expect Walker to be fit enough to play some games, and maybe there would be some fear of rotation. But as I was kind of saying, I think Pep usually enters the season and kind of reassesses based on who he thinks his kind of talisman players are, and for a while it was someone like KDB in the previous years, where whenever he was fit, he was always someone that you would guarantee to play. And then the Trent and Robertson dilemma might not even be a dilemma, because you could be doubling up on both of these players. Arguably, Luis Diaz is well priced as a midfielder. I am slightly worried about the rotation aspect of Liverpool. I still think Klopp will have a tendency to kind of sub off someone like Luis Diaz at 70 minutes, whereas if you simply just go with Salah and your tried and trusted Robertson and Trent, I can see rotation hurting the defenders less, and also simply Salah less as well, because he's such a fit player and he can play all the time. Triple up on Arsenal. Thoughts on Tierney, Jesus, and Saka? I think Jesus and Saka are it's a weird one, because we always know that midfielders will always outplay forwards, but the nice thing about Jesus is he might be guaranteed on penalties, and I think that's going to be what draws my conclusion as towards as for Jesus and Saka. The other weird thing is Luis Diaz is at the same price at 8, and so is Foden, so you have to kind of consider all these sorts of things. Exactly. With Klopp too, what I like about the 5 subs though is if he, let's say, takes out Trent from the game and Liverpool are kind of steamrolling the game, then you've got a good chance of actually securing a clean sheet. As far as the midfielders, I think it just hurts players like Diaz and Jota more. So I'm definitely looking at people's tweets. Let's have a look at some of the message requests. So this is from Luis. A little bit of an early draft here. So we've got Mendy from Chelsea and James. One thing that does concern me about Chelsea's early run is, I mean, it's just losing Rudiger, really, and then losing other key pieces as well. I imagine it seems like Azpilicueta might stay. I haven't really heard any updated news on whether he's actually going to Barcelona, but that's a small source of concern. I also think that Reece James could be playing right centre-back. That's also a slight point of concern. Arguably, they don't really have too good a right wing back option. But that's one point of concern. Whereas I'm more guaranteed on Chilwell 100% playing left wing back, which is I think maybe why Chilwell might be a little bit more interesting. Mendy at 5 is for me. I would just try and risk the money to not go double Chelsea early in the season. I really think that the Chelsea defense was quite appalling without Rudiger at the back half of last season, and we have so many more guarantees, even if it's like stretching towards Ederson, since you still have space for a third City player. Issue, of course, I can see is that bench-wise, we don't have too many options. I think there's also a 4.5 midfielder with Andreas Pereira. Neto's an interesting option at 5.5, but I think people might be thinking about Neto 2 years past, where he was quite an electric player. I just feel like with the current coach, at least what we saw last season from Wolves, is that they're a very, very inoffensive team when it comes to expected goals, and I think Neto still isn't nailed as an option, which is why I'm not even sure I would kind of risk him as an option. I think you would probably want to cut down on one of the players that you have there to kind of solidify the team. But otherwise, a very, very nice looking early draft. Henry with a nice little early draft as well. So we have Raya here, Tomiyasu, Perisic. I've seen the Perisic and Tomiyasu combo. It's quite good because as I said, the defenders seem to be absurdly well priced. By comparison to some of there aren't really many budget forwards this year. Arguably, though, the premium forwards are well placed. I think Jesus is weirdly well priced. And you've gone for Kane over Haaland, so that's an interesting one. But anyone going for Son drafts, I feel like I might lean back towards Son. Another thing with Rafinha as well. I imagine, are you picking Rafinha for any specific reason? It seems like he might go to Barcelona potentially, and even if he goes to Arsenal, very worried about what that rotation means for rotation pieces such as Martinelli and Smith Rowe, who already had somewhat diminished minutes last season as true FPL options, because getting them right week on week was very, very tough once Martinelli was kind of reinserted back into the team. I like the Luis Diaz Salah Trent combo. I think that's probably the safest combo that people will go for. But given that you've gone for Tomiyasu, I'm just thinking whether there's an opportunity there to maybe just go for Robertson as well, if you have faith in the Liverpool defense. I'm not sure if you do. The Raya combination is very nice as well. Adam Lynch, nice to see you around as well. Hope you're doing good. Another Chelsea double sort of lineup. Once again, I'm still a little bit concerned about the outgoing transfers for Chelsea, and the state of the midfield near the end of last season was a little bit worrisome, but of course they have a bit of reinforcement in terms of Gallagher joining that team. Trippier is definitely a very, very high value option. My concern is, I think, especially with how spread out the cash is, players like Neto and Trippier, you're kind of looking at them to play week on week because you don't really have a very good replacement in these sort of forward positions where you have two 4.5s. So I really feel like you still want at least one player who's going to be a consistent bench option, I think, this season, if you are to play with a back five. Then again, I think if you're very confident about, let's say, the Sven Botman transfer and also the general form in Newcastle, perhaps not a source of worry. My worry would only be mostly placed around Neto, right? Rashford, of course, is an interesting player at that sort of price point. You're on Laporte from City. Yeah, I think Laporte is a good kind of way to get away from Cancelo. Jerome Robertson, hope you're doing well. Just V, nice to see you. Jordan as well. Foden can't be that good anymore, not playing at striker at all. Yeah, I feel like the issue with Foden is similar to Bernardo last season, where he undoubtedly will kind of enter these hot streaks, but I don't really like the opportunity for Foden to kind of play in the central midfield position and therefore not be super involved. And if KDB plays, that's also taking away from Foden's ability to create through set pieces and things like that. You can send your drafts through Twitter and I'll have a look at most of them. Kulusevski over Saka. Yeah, that's a question mark as well. I really think that at that sort of 8.0 price, if you've not already considered Luis Diaz and you already have let's say if you've gone for Robertson instead, and you're looking at that 8.0 player price, just because Kulusevski is very prone to rotation for me, I would just much prefer Saka Jesus first things. Who are we saying losing a lot of depth? Are we saying Chelsea? Yeah, that's the weird thing with Chelsea. We haven't really seen too many incomings in terms of players that I think would make you more interested in going for Chelsea players. Oh, sorry, I did miss that. I don't know. Yeah, I feel like, okay, the 6.5 forward, it's Yeah, I mean, I just feel, would you not rather have um, a midfielder potentially, since you already have Neto, and then kind of just going for that fifth midfielder over a 1 at 6.5? Because I feel like I've had a look at some of the budget forwards, and I just don't. I'm not sure if I can actually rate their price at this point in time. Everyone is pulled into the Neto hype, though, it seems. Neto hype as well. Everyone does really like double Chelsea defense. What about the Tottenham defense, though? Are we not interested in that anymore? And then also not going for Salah. You should have mentioned that as well. I think the one issue with this drop, I think, is slight rotation issues. You've got Johnny at least who provides good coverage, but then I wouldn't necessarily double up on two Wolves players. I don't think they were a particularly great team last season. I know Johnny had a little bit of a good stint, especially after that blank game week from game week 30 and so on, but that's kind of my concern there. I'd probably prefer a little bit of depth in terms of Tomiyasu, at least if you're covering Arsenal. And then Martinelli, it's to be seen, because he did play very well near the end of the season, but he was still a rotation piece. Tech XEO, pretty template, that's fair enough. Man United and Palace seem to rotate quite well with each other. As such, Rashford and Elise will be rotating to be in the starting 11. Thoughts on my initial draft? Yeah, I think that's an interesting one, but I think the thing to think about as well is Rashford and Elise's kind of positions in the team, whether they're completely locked up. I think with Elise you have a little bit more comfort because Crystal Palace have lost a bit of depth, but Rashford, still not exactly sure until the preseason whether he's going to be worth it. If he does play most of the games in the preseason, and it seems like Ten Hag's going to play with him, especially with Ronaldo maybe on his way out, then Rashford for me is definitely a great budget option. I think Sancho's slightly overpriced, of course, when we look at United, but he seems to be the more interesting player of the two, unfortunately, which does kind of trim down your options in terms of price. Haaland and Salah. I feel like the issue with Son as well is that additional 0.5 has to come from a defender. It feels like, if you want to stretch the Son. So it seems like Haaland's really well priced, and I think Haaland, Jesus, or at least starting one of Haaland and Jesus, is going to be how everyone plays around that. You obviously have money to spend too in terms of Mendy, and whether you want to keep him. That's another kind of question mark. I feel like what's worrisome with Mendy is that Chelsea team actually doesn't concede many shots. So he's one of those keepers where you absolutely have to bank in the clean sheets, and that might be a slight problem for him. Let's just have a look at some of the message requests as well. So 9 minutes ago from Jordan Parr, 2 million in the bank. I guess first question would be why have that 2 million in the bank? Are you kind of looking at any futuristic options as players who interest you? I'm not super fond of Bruno, if I'm being completely honest. I still like Foden, and I like the fact that you actually have the depth with Neto over there. As far as Luis Diaz, Saka, once again, I guess the only trap really with this draft is lack of Salah, and I really would spend all your money at the start of the season. I think, I mean, there's a reason why you have a 100 million budget, unless you're trying to price in a transfer in game week 2, which I'm not really fond of, once again, just because you want to start the season really with the team that you're happy to play with for a few weeks. You want to at least start the season, unless you're planning to attack with an early wildcard, which I think already kind of pigeonholes you strategically. Much in the same happens with when you book in a transfer in advance if you have 2 million in the bank. So I feel like I'd much rather have a team that I'm happy with for at least the first 6 or 5 game weeks, maybe even 8, because we know there's an international break kind of set around there, and then you can kind of plan around that. Pope's price is fantastic. I think that's the first kind of Pope draft I've seen. Pope is really absurdly well priced, but I think people are also thinking about, at the same price, Trippier being 5.0. Perhaps Trippier is slightly more interesting as an option. And I think Cash, he had some magnificent highs last season, but also I don't think Aston Villa overall as a defensive unit were particularly great. Whereas I think Newcastle, if you look at their kind of defensive trends after that winter break, when they kind of consolidated on new transfers and so on and so forth, they did seem to be trending towards being a good defensive team, especially at home. So I would definitely maybe look towards even going for Trippier and then maybe opting to go for a cheaper keeper potentially, if that kind of suits you. Alan, stream, thank you so much for joining us. And yeah, this is kind of what I was talking about with Spurs. Definitely, I feel like going for both their fullbacks makes a lot of sense. For me, it holds the same logic as why a lot of people were going for James and Chilwell earlier on last season. Spurs have a good run of games themselves. We know that they're a team that probably won't suffer too much from rotation, even though they're in the Champions League, because those games don't really conflate with the early game weeks anyways. You're pretty much playing week in, week out, and I think Conte's going to play with the strongest team. And unless any kind of right wing back signing happens within the first few game weeks, you're not really going to be effective if we know, let's say, Doherty's going to be that starting right wing back, because we know he is just that much better than Emerson. Team looks interesting for sure. Fornals is an interesting bench piece. Wouldn't have really thought about that, but I didn't necessarily see the kind of rotation between, let's say, the fixtures of West Ham and Wolves, but that could be interesting. As far as Jesus and Haaland, seems like that's going to be the template front line for everyone, unless they're going for a 5-4-1 or 4-5-1 variation. So quite nice so far. Here's your early draft, Perry David. Trippier, up, fantastic option. Pickford's an interesting 4.5. Do you guys prefer Pickford as an option, or because for what worries me about Everton is, I mean, they were in pretty poor form at the end of last season, and I think their fixtures were actually quite good. It's a similar situation here where they're actually playing teams like Brentford and Leeds early on, and they actually have a good run. So I think the point of comparison with Brentford is that they both are playing arguably teams within that sort of what we're expecting to be the bottom half of the table, I would say. And you're either picking between Pickford and Raya, and I kind of like Raya from a consistency point of view. I feel like Pickford's interesting, of course, when he has these kind of miraculous games where he pulls off fantastic saves, and the form he was in individually was great. But I also feel like when I'm thinking clean sheets, I feel like Everton's going to concede much more chances than that Brentford side, but that's something to think about. The only thing I don't really like, I suppose, is the kind of Mings and Cresswell defense. I'd much rather you probably spread that money out and maybe consolidate, actually, to be honest, more on Liverpool players, more on City players, even Spurs players as well, because I just think they're much stronger on a team basis. Like, let's say if we look at Perisic as an option, I'd much rather play Perisic at 5.5 than Tony, even though he has a good run of games consistently. But I can see the point of going for Tony because he has such great games. It's just a weird thing here, where I still prefer what the defenders can offer from a team like Spurs, because they are that kind of double-edged sword, which you don't have when, let's say, Tony is in a bit of a barren run, and also losing Eriksen is going to hurt his creativity a bit. Will Doherty be fit in time for the season? And that's the thing I was kind of saying with TechXO. I think Doherty's a great option if you know he's fit for the start of the season. We'll find these kind of things out in the preseason, right? So I don't think there's much to really worry about. As far as Guimaraes or Martinelli, I think Guimaraes is a bit of a trap in terms of someone being a consistent weekly option. He's a box-to-box midfielder. And I think people are maybe a little bit too high on his fantastic games in the double game week for Newcastle. Martinelli, what worries about me is the sort of depth that Arsenal have now, especially even with the kind of signing of the player from Porto. I'm not really sure whether he gets to start game in, game out. We saw at the end of last season he was still rotating quite a bit with Smith Rowe, even though I would say he probably is slightly more favored by Arteta as a true left winger. But I think we will also see Odegaard kind of pushed into that sort of diamond position, and then Partey coming back will actually allow Arsenal to kind of play that 4-2-3-1 structure. So that's an interesting thing. Fernandes, for me, is not a good pick for now. I'd still much rather start with a premium that is, let's say, Son or Salah, players who I would say are much more consistent because their team environment is not volatile. So we ended up last season with a United team being completely out of sorts. The bulk of that team is still there, and I think that's a little bit of a early warning sign, I would say, for looking at United as an option, and especially putting so much money into a United premium. I'd argue that anything above 10 is going to be my version of a premium, and I think Fernandes is still a little overpriced for now. It's definitely, for me, more sensible to actually go with someone like a Son and then downgrading into Fernandes if it seems like Fernandes is in form, especially if Ronaldo isn't going to play at United any longer. Ali Sports Fan, Adam, your team is Mendy, Chilwell, James, Tomiyasu, Trent, Cancelo, Neto, Kulusevski, Salah, Haaland, Jesus. Very, very strong, very, very template. I like the options. I mean, I don't really have any complaints. It seems like a lot of people have gone for Neto as that kind of option in the midfield. I feel like last season we had so many options at that 5.5 to 6.5 price, but this season it's realistically only going to be Neto, unless we have players coming from the sort of championship sides that are going to electrify us, or even someone like, let's say, Gordon, who had an okay, I would say, kind of debut season or full season really in the Premier League, who did quite well. And maybe if him and Everton are able to kind of show some formidable form, he could be an option to think about because he's on set pieces as well for that Everton team. Let me just say, I'd probably actually start off my draft with going for Raya as a template just to save money for a bit. And I don't really have any kind of complaints of people who are going for Pickford. I think Pickford's a very sensible option. I just feel like he's much more volatile, and I like Brentford's run of games. I'd happily say they probably get at least 33% of a clean sheet, whereas with Everton, I feel near the end of the season they were absolutely kind of scraping games by. And Pickford had some miracle performances, but nothing too lovely. Rashford seems like a pretty low risk Man United asset. I think and that's what's interesting. Sorry, I might have misspoke there in terms of when I was talking about the 5.5 to 6.5 options. I think Rashford's quite interesting. So let's actually pop Rashford in as a kind of draft option. Probably going to start with Salah and Son, to be honest, just because I'm still not sure about how I feel about the Haaland situation. And if I'm going to play 5-4-1 or 4-5-1, I feel like Jesus is the one. So we'll start with there. Defender-wise, for the reasons why I explained that I'm not sure about whether Reece James will start at right centre-back, I think Chilwell seems like a logical option. He played the last game of the season last year, so we know he's fit and probably ready to go at the start of the season. Once again, preseason will probably tell us whether Alonso is still around at the club. Cancelo might be a lock, maybe Laporte even, if we wanted to kind of look budget-wise to start with. And then I think you've got Tomiyasu and Trippier. I can obviously upgrade from one of them, but I think arguably I will be going for Trent to start things off with. And then this kind of puts me in a position where I've got a lot of money to spend. Probably going to lock down some budget forwards. For now, I'm not really too fussed of picking the correct 4.5s. We'll just go with Dwight over here and then just Greenwood for now. That does kind of call to me to actually get a proper midfielder. I think midfield-wise, it's an interesting one at the 8.0 price. I clearly have the space to go for Diaz, so I'm going to lock him in. And then it seems like basically Neto's screaming at me right now. It's a weird one here where I think maybe the weakness in this draft is lack of Newcastle. I think Newcastle is a team that we expect to do well defensively. Price point-wise, maybe that means having to take out someone like Trent and going Robertson and then going for Trippier. And then I can kind of rotate with Wolves and Newcastle. It seems like some people are kind of moving towards that because it seems like Newcastle and Wolves assets are that kind of budget tier right below players like Arsenal, players from Arsenal and Spurs, I would say. And then I'll actually just quickly go back to some other people's drafts. So, Jerome, so you're thinking of getting Gordon/Gray/Fornals over Neto if the hype dies down? Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'd say probably definitely look at preseason. Let's see like how many games Neto actually starts, because one of the issues, of course, was Neto wasn't consistently starting near the end of the last season. Tyler Bradbury, let's have a look at your draft. Justin's a great option too. We didn't really talk about Justin, but if he gets to play another full season out, just like two years ago, he could be an interesting option once again. You've gone for James, no issues there. And as mentioned with Alisson, I think what's interesting about Alisson is you don't have anyone at Liverpool who's actually that close to him in terms of price, because even Matip is now 6.0. I'm not even sure if Matip actually plays as many games as he did last year. I really think Konate could actually just usurp him, even though Matip had such good individual form in the Premier League. I just don't think that in terms of the way Klopp is going to bear out with his team, whether Matip's going to play as many games as he did last year, I think this is the year where Konate could arguably take that spot and just play alongside Van Dijk. I think the only thing I don't really like here is Barnes and Havertz, if I'm being honest. I really don't know if Chelsea have got enough reinforcements from the midfield and even the defensive point of view to be as solid in terms of how ball dominant they are possession-wise and how many chances that actually gives Havertz as quite an expensive option too. Let's actually see how much Havertz is, because I didn't really take a good look at Havertz. I mean, at 8.0, I still think Jesus is a slight better shout, because we know even last season when Lukaku wasn't necessarily playing games, you still have the option of maybe Havertz being substituted off. Perhaps you're kind of preying on the fact that I guess Lukaku's gone to Inter Milan and that Havertz will start a lot of games, but I don't think that really changed much because we had a long stint where Lukaku was benched and Havertz was the starting player for Chelsea, but I don't think he was still particularly effective as that sort of focal point for that Chelsea team. So I don't really think he's that explosive. That's my only real concern. I mean, I'd even prefer, honestly, Callum Wilson more. I don't really know how much he is, but as long as he's actually fit, I would actually probably rate him as quite a good option to start with too. Especially if you're looking for a little bit more cash to spread, I think Callum Wilson's definitely going to be an interesting option. It's him or Tony, and I feel like with someone like Tony, you're missing the creativity that Eriksen brought in. If you look at Tony's kind of goal scoring metrics and his expected goals metrics, it did kind of fall off a little bit until Eriksen kind of rejoined the team. Rashford, no way. I mean, as I said, Rashford's going to be one where I need to be watching preseason and seeing whether he actually gets consistent starts and whether he actually looks like he's ready to play consistent football. He's just a placeholder for now. I'm not really super keen on Rashford, if I'm being honest. Let's have a look at this team here. Tomiyasu, yep, interesting. I mean, one thing I would say is the bench probably needs a little bit of a helping hand because I don't really see Tanganga starting. You want someone who's going to come in and probably produce a little bit more than McGinn, in my opinion, because I feel like with McGinn, he kind of serves the role of a 4.5 midfielder, and therefore maybe if you have some budget defenders that you can go for, I'd probably try to move around that. Broja is an interesting option. I mean, I don't think he'll play too much for Chelsea. We'll see what happens, of course, but how much does he... I just wonder if that would be a slight waste of money in terms of, 5.5 for Broja. Yes, he looks good at that price if he was actually consistently starting, but I feel like that's probably a little bit of a waste of money at the start of the season. So I'd probably pass on Broja. It was frustrating to own Havertz last season. Yeah, absolutely. Are you going to have a league this season? Yep, I will do indeed. I'll actually paste the league link in the chat. Sorry, guys. We have started a league indeed. Ramsey over Neto for me. Yeah, that makes sense. I think you could definitely look at someone like that. So that's the league. My transfers, this is an autocomplete, so it doesn't really particularly matter. I haven't really thought about my draft per se. I'm not sure if I'm going for Haaland because I think Jesus is so well priced. He no longer occupies that kind of space in my head in my team in terms of Haaland because I'm still not kind of sure about how many games he'll play consistently and whether the team will actually use him correctly as a focal point. So that's a question to be asked. I definitely think Salah starts the season off with much too many good games, and I feel like he's just not really even worth the gamble. So these players are almost locks for me. I think Perisic is a bit of a lock for me as well, from Spurs. And I think everyone else is sort of up for grabs. I'd be totally down to go for Son. Pruckern. Nice to see draft. Another Bruno draft. So I think the one thing here is in terms of consistency in the starting 11, I'd probably say perhaps a little bit of too much money is spread across players over Newcastle and Wolves. I feel like I'd limit that to 2 if I was being honest. And I like Trippier a lot though. And I personally actually value Neto a lot as a player. I'm not sure if you guys have ever seen my videos from 2 years ago, but back when I used to do tactical analysis of games, I was very interested in Neto because he is one of those sort of highly direct wingers who creates goal-scoring actions consistently. And I think someone like Rafinha is in that mold, whereas when you compare it to someone like Alan Saint-Maximin, who does a little bit more with the ball technically, but probably doesn't have the same sort of equivalent end product when it comes to... I mean, he would I think he's argued at least that if he had better teammates, he'd produce more season to season. But I feel like he's much less direct as a player, even with, let's say, how he carries the ball into the final third, how he kind of looks for goal scoring opportunities himself. So his goals are almost wonder goals because it's like him dribbling within a sea of defenders and then trying to score. Whereas Neto is someone who is always looking to kind of attack a defender and then just kind of create a goal scoring action there. So I do like Neto. I think Bruno as a box to box midfielder probably worth a skip. In this sort of draft here, perhaps perhaps the way to go is to think about playing another fifth consistent defender, because I'd probably prefer that over Bruno, if you don't rate Tomiyasu super highly. But I guess it really depends on whether we have guarantees that Tomiyasu will start. I like the draft here. As I said, I'm not a huge fan of St. Maximin. I'd much prefer, if we were to go for a Newcastle attacking option, to just go for Callum Wilson. Yes, he's a little bit more expensive, and then the same sort of issues with Rafinha there, where I really think, I guess he's leaving Leeds, and also if he stays in Leeds, I'm not really sure if he's actually worth it right now, because he has been upgraded, I think, correctly to kind of match, I would say, the stature of Leeds as a team. I think they're definitely a kind of team that probably will be looking to once again escape from relegation. So the quality and the chances that Rafinha gets aren't particularly high. And I feel like if Bamford finds his way back into the team, you're also taking away from the penalty aspect that Rafinha did kind of benefit from for quite a bit due to Bamford's kind of very, very kind of injury-plagued season. So that's one kind of point of concern that I have there. But otherwise, a very interesting draft. Haaland, Jesus, once again, the template forward, front line. No real issues with this draft, to be honest. It's just double Chelsea for me. I'm not sure if I'd personally go into double Chelsea. And I guess with Martinelli, I have to say I'd have to look at Arsenal more into the preseason, just having a look at whether they're going to change themselves tactically. Because obviously Gabriel Jesus is a sort of pressing, attacking forward, and very different to Lacazette, who dropped deeper. We saw Arsenal play with Nketiah towards the end of the season, but the tactical structure was quite different too, because Nuno Tavares had to play. We had iterations of Arsenal playing 3 at the back and 4 at the back as well, but a very kind of open 4 at the back where Tavares was playing a free role, and then you'd see Xhaka kind of slot back in at left back. So I have to kind of see whether Martinelli kind of finds his way back into the team, because I still think he's a little bit overpriced if we're going to expect rotation from Martinelli. Other than that, I actually really like the team. Thoughts on the threemium? Honestly, Henry, I've got to say, I think I'm completely against the threemium concept. I feel like the same thing will go as last season, where I think Son will cover Kane, or conversely, maybe you could say that Kane will cover Son, just because now that Son's adequately priced, you could arguably say that Kane is going to benefit from especially also some of the kind of reinforcements that Spurs have had in terms of midfield and kind of defensive depth. I'm not a huge fan of the freemium at all, because I feel like, yeah, so the way your team has kind of been hampered is that you're now kind of forced to play players like Johnny as a starter. And even Podence, who generally I don't rate much as someone with a lot of end product. He's an interesting option when you have a very good kind of fixture. The same way, for example, like you wouldn't consider Trossard as a consistent option. I feel like that's the kind of trap that you're falling into with the threemium. And from a price efficiency point of view, I would say the defenders are really, really well priced this season. So take that time to probably milk that money into the defenders and ensure that you have better assets. Because I would just say, for example, Saka, Jesus, I'd still prefer if they were able to round out the rest of your team over going for the double up of Son and Kane. Let's look at Pro's team. Hope you're doing well. Hope you're doing well too. I actually really like this team. Kulusevski's an option that we haven't really seen too often. I think early on we did see a Kulusevski draft. There is a question, of course, of whether Kulusevski will get the same sort of minutes that he did last season. He was coming off the bench at times. And I think the one thing that Kulusevski did show is that he does have some slight stamina issues. But I think as a football player, in terms of his actual technical ability, I think he's wonderful, especially on that right wing position where he can shoot that beautiful left foot finesse because he's so left footed. If it seems like the tactical structure of Spurs is that they're going to continue with that sort of front three and Richarlison is a depth option, then sure, Kulusevski makes sense. But at 8, if he's rotation prone, I really think Kulusevski is just not worth it. And he might be the only slight issue I have with this draft. Otherwise, I do like it. Now, FPL Masala, let's have a look at that. Once again, Neto and a lot of Newcastle as well. I do like the use of Wilson. I think he's, if you've opted for Saka, which you have here, I think it makes sense. I would say Coutinho's for me, it feels like a little bit of a trap. I'm not sure if Aston Villa looked like the team that they were in that kind of red hot run when they started with Gerrard. I really think that they did fall off a little bit of a cliff, and part of that too was Coutinho dropping off in terms of his underlying stats as well, his efficiency as a player, and his ability to kind of actually find a lot of space in areas outside of the box and actually making these kind of runs into the box. I think we're much more limited towards the end of the season. Andreas is clearly that kind of, I think, very solid 4.5 midfielder option, but I think the money around Coutinho could be probably spread around. I do like the option of going for Wilson and actually marrying that up with Saka, though. Very interesting draft. Let's have a look here. I'll just start from the bottom here with JDDJ. I'm happy with this. A little worried about the bench. Picked a Mendy Elanga over Sanchez keeper. That's fair enough. I mean, I think a lot of us will probably start off thinking about maybe this is the year we go for players like Alisson or Ederson, just to make sure that we actually have triple Liverpool and City, which we actually have in this perfect draft structure here. So no real complaints. I guess the depth is just a little bit of a question point. We'll have to see. Let's see whether Elanga is going to be a consistent option, because I think with this setup, you probably want to go for someone like Pereira, who you'd expect to start for Fulham if he actually signs for them, just so you actually have a little bit more security from the bench. I'd probably actually move Mendy if possible, just to upgrade another option. I feel like maybe the one trap with this draft here is potentially a little bit of rotation affecting the Arsenal players. Near the end of last season, we actually saw Cedric actually pick up a bit of form. Perhaps he could actually, for a while at least, maybe take the starting spot over Tomiyasu in terms of that right back position. I know Tomiyasu played a little bit of a brief stint at centre back when Ben White was out for injury, but we'll have to kind of see what kind of preseason side that Arsenal consistently puts out, because Saliba will also be competing for that centre back spot, and I think that kind of hurts Tomiyasu, which is why he was kind of priced as 4.5. Given that he also had a very weird kind of injury situation as well there. So I would probably try and avoid that sort of double up of Tomiyasu Martinez, because I feel like that's a little too rotation prone, unless you can kind of cough up a little bit of money in the bench. And I think Mahrez follows the same trap too, in this kind of draft structure, because even though you have Jesus leaving the team and Jesus was competing for that right wing spot at times, I still think you could have, let's say, Foden playing on the right and Grealish playing on the left too. And even Sterling, as long as he stays for City, that still probably hurts Mahrez's spot, but I imagine you've picked Mahrez because you're expecting Sterling to go. Chilwell over James, yeah, I agree. I think that makes sense. I think you can either double up on them, or you can just simply go for Chilwell, because you're more kind of locked into the fact that he'll play fullback consistently, whereas with James, he could be playing right centre back. With that guy, we've got a draft here where he's gone for Chilwell. Once again, I like this draft, but I'm not sure if I'm a fan of Coutinho. That's all I would say there. Let's just go back to other people's drafts. Abdul Rahman, think of dropping Jesus or Haaland and spreading the funds. I think because you've gone for a double premium, it doesn't really hurt your draft. Where would you spread the funds? I think one thing I'll say is that because you actually have such a strong kind of option as a rotation piece in terms of Martinelli and Neto, you don't really have too much of an issue in terms of spreading funds. By the way, is anyone actually thinking about going for a bench boost at the start of the season? That could be really interesting. Alan, you're off. Thank you so much. Keen for the season. Definitely, I'll be looking forward to having you around. JH Football, Bruno Guimaraes to have Tomiyasu on the bench, or Rashford. I think it depends on the preseason for sure. I'd probably be a little bit more keen in terms of Rashford if he was able to nail down a starting position consistently. Correction, Awani is 6 mil, not 6.5 mil. Fair enough. Thanks, Adam. Which duo would I prefer? Robertson and Mount, or Chilwell and Diaz? Probably Chilwell and Diaz, if I was being honest. Just because I feel like Chilwell will nail that left wing back position, because when he was actually playing consistently before his injury, he actually was playing week in, week out. Whereas Mount, I think, is someone who you'd probably expect to get a little bit more rest at times than Chilwell. And I like Diaz as an option, just so you can actually gamble on the upside there. I feel like maybe if, let's say, Liverpool don't have the best of starts in terms of clean sheets, perhaps it's a bit of a trap to go so deep into defense at the start of the season as well. Depends on whether you have Trent, as I would say. I don't even think the Spurs opening run is that good. I have Son because he's incredible, but anyone else seems like a reach. I'd somewhat agree, but I still feel like the Spurs opening run is not too bad. Let's have a look at the fixtures. I mean, Southampton at home is a great game. Wolves is a great game. These are both games where I could easily see a clean sheet. Forest, I mean, maybe they could lose a clean sheet there. West Ham's definitely a tough game away. Fulham's a great game. I don't know. I feel like these are great games, barring Chelsea, really. From a clean sheet point of view, maybe arguably West Ham as well. So not really worst, and then the run gets, it does kind of sour up here, but we know that they're a bit of a bogey team for the City team. And it really depends on whether you actually have a little bit more confidence in someone like Perisic. I mean, he's an absolute workhorse, so that will be quite interesting. And I do think that that Spurs team was showing a lot of form both on the defensive end as well. When it comes down to the underlying metrics in terms of expected goals conceded and things like that near the end of the last season, they picked up a lot of form there. So I have a little bit of faith in Spurs as potentially being season keepers. St. Maximin forward to midfield. I like the move there, but I feel like St. Maximin wasn't producing enough as a forward himself. Like, even if we look at St. Maximin as someone who scored 116 points last season, if he's a midfielder, right, and we're kind of to project the amount of points again, I'd probably slap like 30 points on him. Is he worth it at 6.5? Potentially he is. I'm not sure if I quite fancied his hauls. Like, I'd much rather just spend a little bit more money, get much more security from someone like Wilson. I mean, Wilson ultimately got 75 points playing half the amount of minutes that St. Maximin did, and they were both priced as forwards. I mean, sorry, 75 is a lot more than 116. So Wilson was definitely on a much better pace back then. And yeah, I mean, I guess it really depends on whether you think Newcastle have strengthened enough in terms of the attacking positions for St. Maximin to actually develop. I actually think that there was a little bit of a drop-off in terms of St. Maximin's actual expected goals and expected assists when he was playing, or when Wilson was actually playing, because it seemed like when St. Maximin was the talisman and was actually playing in central positions, he actually got more goal involvement because the sort of play was funneled around him. Whereas when Callum Wilson plays, they do have a true focal point. And even though that's an opportunity for Wilson to get assists, I feel like his value as someone who maybe scores a few goals, or hopefully a few goals, is no longer there. So that's my sort of slight concern with St. Maximin. You can't bench boost, don't know the... Not bench boost, sorry. I was thinking more about... What do you mean you can't bench boost? Sorry, don't know the right lower price players who will play. Oh, okay, yeah, you're saying that it's not worth it. You only do bench boost on double game week. That's fair enough. I mean, there's not going to be as many double game weeks this year as last year, so that's going to be one kind of point to think about. He made a draft a bit earlier, by the way. I'll have a look at that. What team do I support? I support Real Madrid. My family's, or my dad's side of the family's based from Madrid, so I'm half Spanish. Do you think Archer at 4.5 mil forward will be given a chance now he's back from loan? Yeah, I mean, he could get a chance, but I feel like whenever you're going for a 4.5 forward, you're not really expecting them to play. Ultimately, they're probably the least kind of concerning point of your bench. There's enough 4.5, even 4.0 defensive options year on year where you don't really have to worry about whether 4.5 mid forward starts. Christian has Mendy, Trent Alexander-Arnold, Robertson, Cancelo, James, Perisic, Salah captain, Mount, Martinelli. That's interesting. That's the first Mount that I've seen. Willock, I'd say Willock is probably worth a pass. The two attackers, I can see your point there for moving away from them. I'd much rather you balance the team maybe around going for Jesus and instead dropping Martinelli if possible, if that's a variation that works for you. I just feel like a little bit too much money is funneled and your forward position is struggling. I think Jesus and Haaland are at such good prices that it's worth them. Sorry, you've actually gone for Haaland there, so I feel like you don't need Willock at all at the midfield position. There will be, with Champions League / FA Cup, lots of matches in the same week towards the end of the season, so double game week will still occur. No, of course, Jeremy, but you're simply just not going to get the same amount of double game weeks as this year. And one of the things, too, that you have to think about when you're planning a double game week towards the end of the second half of the season is that you might have to kind of change your wild card and the way that's played. And even if you're building towards a double game week, I think it's suddenly still presents you with options, because after those double game weeks are played, you'll be left with a slightly weaker team, which I think was something that I don't know if you've been watching Raptor, but that was something that he was kind of struggling with, because he kept his bench boost towards the late end of the season, and it did kind of hurt him because the subsequent weeks are kind of affected in terms of the efficiency of your overall starting 11. So there is a strategy where some people do end up bench boosting at game week 1. I'm not saying it's the most efficient strategy, but it's definitely one of them where you no longer have to think about, oh, okay, do I need to constantly build towards a bench boost for a double game week, if that makes sense. Thoughts on Bruno Newcastle? I'm hoping they play him cam. I mean, I don't really expect him to play Cam, and I think that's why he's not really efficient as an option. So for me, I'd probably skip him. Abdul Rahman says he's going to prefer improving the midfield. I suppose, yeah, if you can find a more consistent option over Martinelli / Neto that you're happy to play week in, week out, I suppose that would be an improvement. But for me, the weird thing is I still think the double premium structure is very, very good this season. New season, new drafts. Good to see, James. So a lot of people going for Mahrez. I guess is that predicated on... I guess the only thing I'd say with the Mahrez picks is that predicated on Sterling leaving, or are you very confident in Mahrez? Because I feel like everyone starts the season with Mahrez, but then you suddenly remember and kind of feel the pain of his rotation. Let's have a look at Jake's draft. Sweet, looks pretty good. So you've got Diaz and Neto. I think the only option I'd probably think about dropping is Rafinha and Walker. I'm not sure what Walker's price. Maybe he's priced at 5.5. Oh, he's actually priced at 5, which is interesting. But I feel like Walker's going to be rotated too much. I guess it depends a little bit on the Cucurella situation, whether Cancelo will actually play consistently at left back. Because if Cucurella comes in, I can see Cancelo starting most of the games over Walker. And that's kind of what I would be concerned about slightly. And then Rafinha, I would say, just playing for that Leeds team. I just don't love their fixed schedule anyways. And him getting taken off penalties because Bamford will probably find his way back into the lineup is going to be a little bit of a concern in terms of whether Rafinha is actually price efficient for me. Swap Mahrez to Diaz if it doesn't go. Yeah, that's fair enough. Let's look at Sam's draft. Changed it a bit. I like the back line. I'd probably rather Tomiyasu over White, but otherwise makes sense. And you're the first person I've seen that's gone for Sanchez. I think Brighton arguably do have a slightly poorer start to the season. It seems like Pickford and Raya have slightly better games, but I can completely understand going for Sanchez if you kind of envisage him as a season keeper. And then there's like the Neto Fornals. Is that kind of like a popular rotation that you're kind of looking towards? I'll have to definitely look at that rotation there with Neto. Even Fornals. So in terms of the fixture run, I guess you've got top games game week 3 and 4. How do West Ham fare? Yeah, it's actually an interesting rotation. Still, Brighton and Aston Villa aren't as green as I'd think. So that's a weird one there. I'm not sure if I'd love Fornals at 5.5, but yeah, I'd probably still try and iron out a starter over the two of them, or at least just pray that Neto will actually play consistently. I think triple Man City is good because of the first 10 games being relatively good. Yeah, I agree with that. But I think the issue still is if you're going for the City midfielders, you're still a little bit wary that they might be rotating, right? That's the thing. Pep does save Mahrez for UCL starts, the occasional sub in the Prem. He absolutely does love Mahrez, and I think that's exactly why Mahrez is going to stay in the club. I think Rafinha is going to Chelsea, that's why. Okay, that's fair enough, Jake on YouTube, yep. Isn't Rafinha gone to Chelsea? I mean, it seems like he's going potentially to either Chelsea or Barcelona. It doesn't seem like Arsenal really have the perfect position for him. And Kedia will receive 20 to 30 minutes, don't you think? I don't think at the start of the season he will, because you don't have that much chance to rotate initially. I feel like he'll play most of the Europa League games, and I think they've probably spent that much money on Jesus for him to start consistently. So that's kind of my concern there. Brighton is a red fixture for West Ham. Absolutely, I agree. And that's what I'm trying to say. I don't know if I'm really interested in even spending 5.5 on Fornals. Mitrovic probably is going to be a pass for me, just because I think the Fulham squad, they haven't really made any significant transfers where I would say they've increased in quality for now. So that's kind of my concern there. JJ Byrne. Interesting draft. I'm not sure if I'm a huge fan of Byrne and Bruno. I kind of like, if you have the ability to move, I'd much rather you go for, unless you're, let's say, planning to play Gabriel very, very consistently, I'd much rather go for Trippier and Tomiyasu over Gabriel and Byrne. As far as Bruno, I think that's fair enough. Odegaard for me is a little bit at a weird price where I wouldn't really consider him too much. That's one of my concerns. I'm not sure if you're not a big fan of, let's say, going for Spurs players, because I can see you've gone for Bowen here, so you've got a very, very, very strong midfield. But my slight concern here is whether the money needs to be actually spent on Odegaard. Perhaps you could actually have another piece that is going to be on your bench, because I imagine you'd be playing Bowen consistently. I'd rather kind of you spend the money between Bruno and Odegaard into one consistent midfielder, and then you actually have a little bit of a weaker bench as a result of that. Because I think usually with FPL, I'd say at the start of the season, there's no real reason to expect that you won't be able to play a consistent team of 11. And worst case scenario, you just need one or two players to come in off your bench, just so you can actually squeeze a little bit more of efficiency within your starting 11. Let's go with Charlie here and his draft. James Tomiyasu, Cancelo, Trent. Once again, pretty much a template backline, I think, where a few people have actually opted to go for double City. This is the first time I've seen an iteration with Ederson. It seems like Cancelo, I think, is a little bit of a sticking point, because I feel like with Liverpool, you have Van Dijk at 6.5, and then you don't have the consistency between Matip and Konate. But then because Laporte and Diaz seem to be consistent fixtures at centre-back, it seems like this could be the season where if you wanted to go off of Cancelo to start, you could. But I can completely understand going for triple City, because there's no real reason to move away from triple City, triple Liverpool. I'm not a huge fan, if I have to say, moving away from Salah. I'm not even sure if... Yeah, I'm not even sure if Darwin's going to get enough minutes for me to start the season with him. I think he's still a little bit overpriced. Perhaps he will find his way towards starting most of the games consistently, but I can definitely see Jota and Firmino taking away from his minutes, even Diaz potentially. So that's kind of my slight concern there with starting the season with Darwin Núñez. But I feel like if it seems like he's, someone who Klopp is ready to play week in, week out in the preseason, and we end up having consistent games with Darwin starting up top, with Firmino probably on his way out, then maybe I'd be a little bit more high on a draft like this. But I'd say, I think with Salah probably going to be staying on pens and having such nice games at the start of the season, I'd probably not want to avoid Salah at the start. Dave is going to switch Neto and Phillips. We're going with 5 at the back. Yeah, I think that's definitely going to be a good option too. I mean, Phillips, I'm not even sure if I'd really spend a Man City player kind of spot on someone like Phillips. I like the team in terms of the actual structure of it. I think there's actually quite a good bit of depth here. Cash might be someone I'd like to move off of. I think Ramsey, if you really value, I would say the rotation between the midfielders, that's completely fair enough. But I'd probably go for a 4.5 midfielder and just make sure that you strengthen your starting 11, because I think it's a little bit where with options like Ramsey and Phillips and Cash, I'd probably not be super confident in having so many rotatable pieces that I'm not super confident in starting every week. So that's kind of my slight concern there. Lonnie's team here. Trent, James, Alonso, Walker. Yeah, same sort of concern that I voiced earlier with Walker, where I don't know if he's going to start enough games at the start of the season, especially with Cancelo. And even Zinchenko possibly playing left back, even if Cucurella doesn't sign for the team. Alonso as well, I think you're basically dealing with the trap with Chilwell, because I think Chilwell will actually take that position for the rest of the season. So I'd say definitely think about Chilwell. He's probably going to take Alonso's position, and that kind of hurts a few players in terms of the way your draft pans out. So let's say if you're not going to start Andreas, because I really don't think you would, I would say this team probably just needs a little bit of spreading of the funds, and maybe that just means cutting down Alisson. If you could find a way to getting, let's say, a Liverpool midfielder like Neto, or even go for Robertson in the defense, and then maybe moving towards a 4.5 keeper, I feel like that's a better option than what we have here, just because Walker's a little bit rotatable, Alonso's a little bit rotatable, and then you already have options where Andreas isn't someone you want to start week in, week out, and then Neto is a little bit of a gamble depending on how the preseason goes for him. Neto Martinelli draft, very interesting. I think this is a pretty solid draft. Botman's an interesting choice. I might have to reconsider on that one. I think for me, it's kind of like Trippier or bust in terms of the Newcastle defense, unless you're, for some reason, really fond of Pope. But I feel like Trippier offers more value at the same price. So that's kind of my only concern, really, with this draft. Otherwise, it looks pretty interesting. Jaden, hi mate, it's been a while. Hope you're doing right. Hope you're doing good as well, Jamie. Jaden, sorry. Perisic, Cancelo, Chilwell. Yep, very, very lovely backline. That's kind of the backline that I think a lot of people will go for, just because Chilwell will be nailed on the left fullback position. and you don't have that doubt on whether he gets to play centre back, which is something that's going to kind of fall over people who are going to pick Reece James potentially. I'd have to definitely think about Awoniyi as well. I'm not really sure if he's going to be someone who I would say I feel like the championship forwards are always a little bit of a trap. But I can understand people going for the kind of money spending there. I just feel like if you already have Haaland or Jesus in your team, is there really a need for another forward? Because history will tell you that midfielders are usually always outperform strikers at the same sort of price point. So that's kind of my concern there, and that's probably the only piece of advice that I'd really have to impart. Just gonna go back on YouTube chat very briefly. Hasn't really had personal deals with Chelsea. I mean, I think it's all rumors, and I mean, I'm not close enough into any significant sources to tell you otherwise. Abdul Majid, how are you doing? Hello. Andreas is going to Fulham, exactly. So I think Andreas is going to Fulham, but you're not going to want to start him week in, week out, right? Even if he plays for Fulham. Can you scale screen down so we see player names on bench? Yeah, absolutely. Sorry about that. Didn't think about that. It's Spurs year, trust me. Let's have a look at this draft. I do actually quite like this draft. I mean, as I was saying, I think Perisic is nice, but I really wouldn't be tempted on a double Spurs premium to start the season. I mean, if you believe it, and you're actually going to start the season with this, I'd say, fair play to you, because I don't think anyone's going to start the season with this sort of draft, especially with going for someone like Grealish. So I guess you're hoping for that kind of second season Pep Guardiola boost from Grealish. That's going to be quite a big gamble, but I do like the draft in general. It somehow is very off template, but then it still has the core tenets of what I would consider to be a good draft in terms of very strong, formidable defense, has the kind of key options. It's just obviously the Salah-less aspect of it that's probably a bit of a question mark. I don't really have any issues with people going away from Haaland. I think if you rate Kane more, fair enough. At least you've got that consistency to start off with, and guarantees of minutes too. So that will be nice. Jonathan. Yep, so another kind of Mendy Chilwell draft. That's fair enough. It seems like that's kind of crept into the template. I'd say Dean is probably going to be a trap. I think that's the only real true trap of the draft. Maybe alongside Mahrez as well, and whether he actually gets enough minutes in the Premier League. But those are my two traps, I would say. Otherwise, I think the draft looks very lovely. Strexley, so that's James and Chilwell draft. That's fair enough. Rashford and Rafinha, so we'll obviously see whether Rafinha finds his way towards Chelsea, and then Rashford and Saint Maximin. Those are going to be interesting options. With Saint Maximin at 6.5 and Rashford, depending on how the preseason goes. This is a 2 premium draft. It doesn't have Salah. I'd still say probably Salah, in my opinion, is someone who I'd prioritize over Haaland and Kane. I completely recognize that there's going to be budget issues there. I'd probably still also try and find a way towards getting a third Liverpool player as well. And maybe at least maximizing with 2 City players if possible. But otherwise, I think the draft actually does look very interesting. No real kind of huge complaints. Maybe Mings can also go away as well. I'm not really sure if I'd like to keep Mings as an option. I'd probably prefer someone like Tomiyasu at 4.5. Find a little bit more budget to spread around. Salah captain first 5. I mean, seems like that's going to be the regular template, at least for the first game of the season. I can see most of the season, most of the player base kind of going for Salah. His effective ownership's probably going to be something like 180% at the very minimum. As far as triple City, you've got that down. Triple Liverpool, you've got that down. Sancho's going to be a huge gamble there, so I think that's a question. I really do like Wilson. Tony has a great run of games, but I am kind of struggling to see whether Brentford will have that sort of same creativity and create enough significant chances for him. The fixtures are there for him, though, so that's fair enough. I actually do really like this draft, so that's really nice. Monitoring Haaland in the Community Shield in Game Week 1, and if he is impressive, I'll do Kane. That's actually a very fair play. Yeah, if you're going to start that, and I guess the interesting thing too is Spurs do start the season with a very, very lovely game, and the City West Ham game is going to be quite a tough one, I think, for even Haaland to start in. I like the draft here. Probably only some question marks over Dallo and Sancho. I'd probably prefer Son over De Bruyne if I'm being completely honest. That's my point of view. I think when it comes to Tony as well, I think I'd probably also rather spending that money in the midfield. I'm not sure if Sancho's the one. I think if you want to go for Sancho, that's fair enough, but I probably still wouldn't bank on the United defense starting the season very, very hot. Prefer the kind of options you have at the price ranges of, Newcastle options like Trippier or even Perisic at 5.5, really, if you can kind of stretch towards that. Should I go all in to replace Ait-Nouri with Chilwell? I'd probably do that, yeah. I mean, I definitely wouldn't start the season with two Wolves options being like potential options or features into my starting 11. That's what I'd say. Thoughts: one, Jesus bad, but these defenders tempt me. All the defenders there that you have are actually very, very good. And for me, Jesus is a great option. I think if you're tempted to go for Jesus, it might mean that Saka has to make way. The only question mark for me would just be whether you really believe in Grealish having a great start to the season, because I think there just wasn't enough data last season for me to say, Grealish makes a lot of sense even at a 7.0 price point. So that's kind of my concern there. Mithy with the last kind of Twitter request for now. Lovely draft. Jesus, Haaland, that kind of... Honestly, I really, really, really like this draft. I don't have too many issues other than, once again, my kind of slight concern over double Chelsea. Probably want to strengthen at least one of the midfield options. I'm not sure if Murphy's going to quite cut it. I think I'd probably start with Pereira first, and then maybe think about whether the Mendy money could go into a budget keeper and then strengthening potentially Martinelli, because you already kind of have Jesus there, who's going to be a constant fixture for Arsenal, hopefully, and I wouldn't really want to play around with Martinelli. What do I think of the team? I do like the team, as I said, so no real issues there. The one thing I would say, too, is I think Darwin's a little bit of an interesting option. I feel like Luis Diaz has similar kind of issues that Darwin kind of poses with rotation, and I feel like what's nice about Luis Diaz is he's priced better as a midfielder, and then on top of that, you've got the possibility of him getting clean sheets too. So with him also, I would say probably being less of a rotation prone aspect or kind of player than Darwin, I think that's the only issue with the draft. But definitely, if you could kind of stretch towards going for Ait-Nouri, then I think that's much better. Going out of Ait-Nouri. Let's just go back to the YouTube questions very briefly. Second GK note, not there. Yep, good to see you back, Fran. Hey, FPL Konate, good to see you as well. One of the funniest faces on FPL Twitter. Nice to see you around. Hope you're doing well. Kind of took a bit of a break from FPL Twitter and all things FPL, but kind of excited to come back into things. JH Football chat, worth to have Salah, Haaland. I really think the Threemium is worth a pass. I'll definitely do a draft now. So let's just kind of go for it. All right, let's just start with Brentford, because I have a little bit of faith in terms of the goalkeeping from Brentford. I'm gonna stick in Son provisionally here. It's Son or Haaland for me. I don't think I'm really gonna opt for Kane. Yeah, I feel like that's how things will pan out. Jesus is interesting for me. I'm unopposed to Rashford. You've got a kind of new manager situation where hopefully he could do well. But St. Maximum is tempting, I guess, at that price point. I do like Callum Wilson, though, at 7.5. The issue is that I'd probably like to stick with my guns and with Jesus. Probably going to go for Trent or Robertson. I'm going to play Chilwell for sure. I'd be tempted to actually go double Spurs, but some people would probably think it's a little crazy. And I guess leveraging that a little bit would be someone like Trippier. Maybe we'll go for Trent for now. Just need to stick in someone like Gale into the team as a budget forward, and we'll kind of think about the Haaland dilemma first. I think structurally, I feel like I will be the type of manager who goes for a 4-5-1 or 5-4-1 start. Not really too tempted into going for two forwards unless I move into a Haaland structure. But it seems like Jesus is probably a bit of a lock for me. Wilson is nice, though. I think when you look at this kind of run of games, it's, yeah, very concerning, obviously, with City and Liverpool being there. But that opening start of the season is quite a good run. And I don't see myself necessarily going for an early wild card to start the season with. So that's one to think about. Guess I'll just stick Cancelo in there for now, or maybe Laporte. Midfield-wise, I'm going to assume that the Rafinha transfer is not going to happen for now. I'd be really tempted in seeing if I could actually start the season with Gallagher, because I think that's the kind of price point of a player that we're looking for, where if he kind of consolidates himself as a starter for Chelsea, I mean, he could be huge. But we'll see. 7.5 and below for now. If I just sort by price. I just don't think Martinelli will actually start. I know you can argue that the same case could happen with Rashford, but I feel like there's definitely a case for rotation to happen with Martinelli. Whereas if Ronaldo leaves, I could see many situations for Rashford's a consistent factor if he plays in the preseason. And Martinelli, I think he'll just rotate. So not even going to consider the element of Martinelli starting consistently for now. And then I guess I'll just put Andreas in the team. And then I got 13 mil to spend. It's probably just going to be Diaz. And then I've got money to spend. Do I have any kind of depth issues? I suppose the issue I have is my 3 subs will be quite poor. Perhaps Rashford has to go to allow for a better sub, but I'm not sure if I really want to squeeze the money into going for 5.5 option like Neto. And then alternatively, I could just go out of Rashford, play a kind of 5. Can't really play 5-4-1 like this, can I? I just don't think Andreas or Rashford is actually consistent enough. And then at 7.0, I'm kind of banking on Grealish, which has the same sort of issue. I'll just stick Archer in there for now, just because I think he could play a few minutes this season. Nothing particular, nothing to expect from him. But also to improve any other aspect, I guess I'm not super happy with the way I have Laporte set out. And I can kind of understand now why a lot of people are tempted to go for Mendy as an option. But am I really sure that Chelsea will keep clean sheets without Rudiger, even though this kind of run of games looks so good? That's probably the question that I'd be asking myself. And I could also downsize, I suppose, Trent into Robertson and see if that can take me anywhere. Issue is 7.5 is just not good enough, and I feel like that's probably why I have to kind of go to Haaland, and then go for a kind of 8.0 midfielder. I think that just might be the issue that I'm facing right now. It's either going to be Foden or Saka. Maybe doubling up is crazy, but I wouldn't be super against it. And then I would go for Haaland. Or even Kane, because arguably if I believe Son's going to haul and Kane's going to do well alongside Son, maybe Kane's one to think about. I feel like the prospect of Haaland is just a little more interesting than Kane for now. And then we just round this off with another 4.5 midfielder potentially. And that would kind of see me playing 5-3-2 consistently. Not crazy opposed to this, other than potentially me. Maybe I could downsize Trippier as well. That could be an option. And then that could allow me to go into Trent. But then I'm not sure if I want to play Tomiyasu every game. So I think Trippier is probably one to think about keeping. Robbo. 4.5 midfielder. Might be stretching it, going for a double 4.5 mid. I'm not sure if that's actually good enough. Hmm. Yeah, this is a bit of a weird structure. I mean, I'd definitely just play this and this, and then I'd captain Salah. Who would I vice here? Yeah, I'd probably keep it like this. Would I be happy to play 5-3-2 consistently? I feel like the answer to myself would be no. Yeah, Doherty's definitely a good option too, but I feel like I'm worried about Jet Spence, Neto or Rashford. I mean, Neto's going to be a great option too. I mean, we can think about Neto in the future. Perhaps maybe Saka is someone who's occupying a little bit too much money in my team, and I have to kind of rethink about how I visualize that, because it could arguably be I could even go for, let's say, someone like Cancelo and then like just drop Trippier, right? Because what's stopping me from going triple City? Do I really need to go for Saka? I mean, arguably this could just be Martinelli, worst case scenario. Like, why not? But then that just kind of forces me to play Martinelli, and that's kind of where my issue kind of comes about. And then Neto, I don't really want to be consistently playing, and then I don't really have a good sub here. If I go for Doherty, that's just gonna. I mean, if I was to go for Doherty, it'd probably be just me based off of me looking at the kind of news in the preseason, seeing if they don't go for a transfer, and seeing that his position won't be affected. Buendia for me is a little bit of a skip. I still think he was rotating a little bit with Coutinho. They weren't necessarily playing the best of football. They were kind of alternating the structure at the end of the season, because I think Aston Villa didn't really have much to play for. And then we saw, for example, them playing two strikers with Ings and Watkins, where Buendia was going to kind of rotate with Coutinho, but we could also see a structure where maybe Buendia and Coutinho could play together. But I think if they continue to play with Buendia and Coutinho rotating, I'm not really a big fan of that. I like 5-4-1, two cheap forwards, one cheap defender. Nice to see people making first drafts. I made one too. Yeah, that's awesome, Brendan. So you just pick the cheapest players for the bench. Yeah, I think if you think about how FPL works, you have a few chips each season to actually change your team around. You've got two wild cards. You do effectively want to start the season with as cheap a bench as possible, because if you think about it from, if let's say we made a kind of logical kind of assumption, right, that points equals price, or I mean points is kind of proportional to price. Obviously you want to have as much money in your starting 11 as possible, because you're not going to get any points for extra bench players. Definitely, I think it's worthwhile having at least one or two bench players that will be playing consistent football, at least logging you in 1 or 2 points each week, because that's all you need. Our Arsenal players a must. I'd probably say 1 or 2. I'd say 1 is probably the bare minimum. I'd go Arsenal. I think they have a really, really good start to the season. I mean, this run here for me is pretty beautiful. They were also in when they were on form. I'd say Arsenal were conveniently dispatching teams like Leicester and Aston Villa. People might disagree with me, but I think that was simply the case when they were kind of in their red hot form before Partey and Tierney were injured near the back half of the season. Silva never burned Martinez bench. Silva and Neves. I mean, I guess the issue with when you say Silva, which Silva are you talking about? Bernardo? Or even Matip for Liverpool if you really want more money. And that's the thing with Matip. I think the issue with Matip is that you're struggling with a player who might be rotated, because Konate might find his way towards starting more Liverpool games in the future. I mean, Konate's at 5.0. It would be a huge gamble. I probably wouldn't start the season with that sort of gamble. But this is kind of like my early draft. I'll probably have to think about how I want to go with this. Clearly, I could definitely just go for Son here and kind of find my way towards playing with Son. Not sure if I really want to play Neto. I think that's kind of a sticking point here for me. Maybe Cancelo could also be a Chelsea player or even a Spurs player, and that would allow me to strengthen that kind of third midfield spot that I have in this kind of tricky 5-3-2 dilemma. But that's a rough little sort of draft that I have for now. Fabio Silva. Yeah, I'm not a huge fan of Wolves, right? Because I feel like they're still quite a weak side overall. Welcome back. Thank you, Shane. I do actually like this draft. There's nothing really wrong with it. I guess it's just the question on Mars, but so I've just posted my my draft. But happy to actually review and continue to review some of your drafts, guys, as that trickles in. I think when I'm looking at this draft here, the only question mark I'd have is really on Odegaard. I also slightly prefer Laporte over Diaz, but I don't really think there's much between them, so that's fair enough. Otherwise, the actual template structure looks pretty good. Triple Chelsea, for me, I feel like it's a little odd that you'd rather go for triple Chelsea than triple Liverpool or triple City. And even though I would say Chilwell, James, and Mount are players that are nailed, for me, you actually have nailed players within Liverpool, which I think is a better situation. And then arguably less nailed players in City, but definitely more, I would say, guaranteed volatility in a positive way. Where right now this Chelsea team for me hasn't actually improved too much, and I think that's kind of my slight worry. I might actually start the season with Gallagher, and hope he has a good preseason and actually finds his way to the Chelsea starting 11. Yeah, that might be the way I kind of pan out my draft for now. It's kind of like picking Bruno Guimaraes, though, isn't it? Missing Salah, though, big risk. I would probably pass on Salah. How much is Salah priced? Is he like a 5.5 keeper this season? 5.0, that's still a pretty good price. But I don't know. I feel like Wolves did kind of fall off a cliff towards the end of the season when it came to how consistent they were at posting good defensive numbers underlying. Because at the start of the season, we did see very, very good metrics for Wolves, but they did kind of eventually fall into a bit of a slid from the defensive point of view, and I feel like the floodgates were starting to open up. I'm not really sure if Salah's going to be able to reproduce that kind of great opening season run. I feel like at that 5.0 price point, I'd much rather Nick Pope, because I feel like there's at least a bit of reasoning, right, in terms of logic of how strong that Newcastle backline is to guarantee him being a worthwhile 5.0 option. Obviously, you've got Mendy as well from Chelsea too. That really just depends on whether you actually have some faith in Chelsea and that kind of opening run, because that's another kind of way to spend the money. I could obviously move Gallagher back into Neto and then go for Mendy too, but probably for now, I'd probably pass on the double Chelsea defense for the kind of reasons I outlined. Alad's team, let's have a look. So I think, yeah, this is actually a very solid draft. I'd probably just think about maybe moving away from Phillips and Kante. I feel like you don't really want to have too many defensive midfielders in FPL. Usually you want to have players who will provide you some attacking returns, because if you look at the Champions League fantasy, the defensive midfielders are kind of rewarded by getting tackles and things like that, whereas in FPL, you don't really get any kind of additional boosts, right, for owning a City player, even if they're playing defensive mid. So if you look at Rodri last season, or even if you look at Kante last season, those were all players who are very, very price inefficient. They're not really worthwhile in getting, even though they play for a good team. So I'd probably definitely think about maybe trying to reduce your team structure in some other positions and trying to improve on options over Rice, Phillips, and Kante, in my opinion. I feel like you'd much prefer either, let's say, downgrading, let's say, Wilson into a cheaper forward and then actually improving your midfield, or vice versa. Let's have a look at Michael's draft. Salah captain, Haaland. Yep, 4-5-1. I feel like that's going to be the template structure that a lot of people are going for. But I think the only issue that I would say here is that I'd say Kulusevski and Martinelli just a little bit too rotation prone for now, as far as I'm aware, because of the Richarlison transfer, and then also just the impact of the Jesus transfer as well. Because we know Martinelli last season was someone who could rotate potentially between the centre forward positions and the left wing position, but you now have him competing, on all fronts with Jesus and Keddy, and also Smith Rowe on the left. So that's kind of my slight point of concern, where I feel like this team might be a little prone to rotation issues. But we'll also see like whether or not some managers will kind of prefer playing specific players in the preseason. Another kind of Neto draft here, that's fair enough. I do like the draft structure here, and once again the kind of template front line of Haaland, Jesus. Honestly, I can't say anything bad about this draft, really. I do like it, and I feel like there is a reason why Saka is priced at 8.0 and Martinelli is 6.0, and it's not just because Martinelli is well priced as a player. I think you just have to kind of value the minutes that Saka plays as a player, and how much faith Arteta has in consistently starting Saka, because there was actually a long run right near the end of the season last year where Saka was a little bit injured and he was continuing to play each game, and that shows you how much faith Arteta has in starting him. Whereas with Martinelli, you could see he was constantly being rotated as well. I think the only thing that I don't really love about this draft here is I wouldn't really want to find myself in a position where I'm starting McGinn. So I feel like you want to cut down on how much money you've spent on the forwards. I'd also say that the defenders in general in FPL are usually much better in terms of value for money. So I'd think about also maybe dropping out of Ramsdale, because if you think about Ramsdale, right, he's a 5.0 keeper. The other Arsenal defenders, even centre backs, are at 4.5 players, and even Gabriel, someone who probably outscored. Yeah, so if you look at Gabriel, for example, someone who played for Arsenal quite consistently last season, he was someone at 5.0 who actually outscored Ramsdale. So you want to actually spend a little bit more money if there's a comparable option in the defensive positions over a goalkeeper. So that's one thing I would say there, Ashdeep. So like I'd probably not go for a 5.0 option like Ramsdale. If you prefer an option like Mendy from Chelsea, that's fair enough. But I feel like if you like Arsenal, then definitely just try and reduce the amount of money that you're spending and just go for a 4.5 Arsenal option, or even just go for Gabriel. That also allows you to go for a 4.5 option potentially in the keeper position and can actually save you a bit of money. I'm not a huge fan of Guehi as well. And Havertz, as I said, even though he might be the focal point of the Chelsea offense, I feel like that doesn't really mean anything. People say that because he's going to play in a central position, but when has the central kind of striker for Chelsea actually produced many, many returns? Even 2 years back before Lukaku joined, I don't really think the central figure was doing much. It was still actually really a Mount season and once again a defender season 2 years back when kind of Tuchel found his way back into the lineup. It was players like Rudiger who were doing consistently well on points, and even someone like Mount who actually found a little bit more form under Tuchel. So that's kind of my concern there. I think Havertz is still slightly overpriced, and I feel like I have no interest in him this season anyways, because the transfers that Chelsea were looking to make, they haven't been solidified yet, so I can't say I really think that's going to help Havertz and improve his chances. Same thing with Watkins, where I feel like I kind of prefer Wilson at that price, or at a price close to that. Absolutely, and obviously hope you can get that top 100k. And congratulations on a great finish. 1 million in the bank. So one thing I did actually mention earlier with saving money in the bank is maybe you've got a transfer booked ahead in advance for the future, but I feel like trying to actually use all your money at the start of the season is actually very, very beneficial. I'd be a little bit concerned for going for Ward-Prowse. I feel like there are going to be better options than Ward-Prowse, especially if you've got that 1 million in the bank. I think your bench is actually very, very deep. And I'd still prefer trying to go for, unless you're actually going to start the season with a bench boost, I really feel like it's not worthwhile having such a strong bench, because if you think about it, most of the weeks after your, let's say, first week, even if you're bench boosting, or if you even have a strong bench in general and you're not bench boosting, you're going to deal with the issue where a lot of the players are getting points on your bench, but you're not consistently finding them in your starting 11, and that decreases the overall strength of your starting 11, whereas a lot of people with weaker benches will have stronger starting 11s, and probably, unless there aren't massive injury issues across the league, they're probably going to be in a position where they're consistently earning more points than you, just from a kind of logical standpoint of the higher point players provide more points, or higher price players. Great to replace Johnny on his difficult fixtures. Yeah, I can understand the rotation aspect there, but I'd probably still think about maybe going for an Arsenal player, right? If you're really kind of keen on going for this kind of Johnny Guay rotation, and maybe even thinking about going for someone like Guaita, right? Because Guaita could be a 4.5 option to cover Crystal Palace if you really like the Palace fixtures. Not really super keen on the Palace fixtures, but that's an option to think about. That will kind of save you a little bit of money. I just think that with Havertz, that's a bit of a question mark, but we'll obviously see. Like maybe there could be a bit of a tactical change up with Chelsea, and I could see Havertz maybe flourishing in a different role. But I think up till now, there isn't necessarily a structure where I found Havertz to be super lethal up top. What about thoughts on the midfielders? I like the midfielders, barring Coutinho. I think that's kind of the risk you have here. I'd much rather start with Salah and probably, I know you've got a very, very well-balanced team, but I'd probably just try to start the season with Salah, if I'm being completely honest. And I'd forget about players like Coutinho. As I said, Kulusevski is a little bit rotation prone. Jim Laporte always scores really well in FPL. And that's the thing, right? So didn't we say, like, I think a good example and exactly what you're illustrating is James Ward-Prowse scoring very, very strong in the Spurs game last season when he was playing in Southampton versus Spurs. So that's the issue. Like, his goals don't actually come from whether or not Southampton are overwhelming the opposition necessarily. It's more so he's an X factor player who can kind of score in any sort of situation. I'm not really a big fan of Mbumo though. Sorry, Mithy. Is Gaza the best 4.0 GK? He had 13 starts in the championship for full mass haze. I mean, potentially, but I feel like you usually just go for a 4.0 GK that kind of backs up your 4.5 GK, right? Because let's say if Sanchez has a red card from Brighton, then I can have Steele as a backup for 4.0. So I feel like that's probably the preferred structure. Thank you, Brendan. I'll have a look at your DM right now. We'll keep an eye on Havertz preseason. Yep, totally understand. And the thing is too, like you can even look at a player like Jesus Eshdeep, so that's an interesting thing to think about. Nor do you actually have to fill out all the forward positions, right? Because we know historically midfielders outperform forwards in terms of price. This is a pretty good looking team for sure. Do like this team. Let's have a look at Runaways team. First draft. Trippier, yep, super interesting. Pope as well, double up in Newcastle. That's the first that I've seen in terms of the defensive. I like people going for more daring options in terms of going for Diaz and kind of looking at that as a replacement to Salah. But I feel like Darwin's price is just a little bit too much. You know, he's so close to a premium price. I feel like if you're going to stretch that far, I'd much rather a mainstay, and that has to be kind of like spending that money on someone like Salah. Unfortunately, that's kind of the situation I'm finding myself in. And with Brighton as well, I'm not sure. I feel like the price point here is just a little bit off, and I feel like you'd much rather just go for 4.5 backups, really. Like, I'd much rather Neto, right, at 5.5 if we're talking about all the potential 5.5 options in the game. And I think having one of them is already good enough because that's kind of the position you've put yourself in. And that way you can actually probably save your money. Thoughts on this as an alternative draft? This is also a pretty interesting draft too. I guess once again it's just that little question mark about the Chelsea defenders, but no real issues. Like if you're gonna go for James, that's fair enough. We did mention that if James plays right centre back, you probably prefer Chilwell in the left wing back position. But that's one thing to think about. Otherwise, it's an interesting draft for sure. Need some constructive criticism, please, man. Absolutely, let's go for that. For me, I mean, first point of order, I would say is Van Dijk. Constructive criticism would be to go away from that. Double City Premium, I'd probably go away from that as well. One of the things I feel like could work out is obviously, yes, you can have a perfect ideal scenario where De Bruyne is consistently finding places or finding opportunities to feed Haaland the ball. But I would say for me, Salah has the fixtures. He's got the penalties as well. And I'd much rather spend my kind of premium money over him. As far as kind of spending and cutting down on money, I feel like Martinelli is too good of an option to be on your bench at 6.0. I'd rather trim down your bench in terms of the actual price of your bench and maybe upgrade an option like Van Dijk. Because Van Dijk is so close to players like Trent and Robertson who outscore him, I would say. I mean, Robertson was pretty close to Van Dijk in terms of points, but I feel like Van Dijk was quite hot at the start of the season. Robertson did miss a few games due to rotation, but on a points per match basis, Robertson was much more efficient than Van Dijk, to the point where I would say he does justify that additional 0.5 because you kind of know when to expect a Robertson rotation and you can move out of that in time. That's pretty much what last season told you. Whereas holding Van Dijk, it feels good, but it doesn't feel as good as when I would say Robertson's ceiling is much higher as an attacking player, right? Because outside of Van Dijk scoring headers, which obviously he can do, he's one of the most lethal aerial defenders that we've seen statistically within the last 4 to 5 years. Ultimately, Robertson is someone who plays for a team that play very expansive football, and as a fullback, he does provide you with a lot more security, I think, and also bonus points too, which is what Robertson and Trent very consistently provide. So that's kind of what I would point out as a little bit of constructive criticism there. Otherwise, I think the team's interesting, and obviously let's have a little bit of a watch for Rashford in the preseason and have a look at what he does. And whether he actually finds himself in the starting 11 consistently with Ten Hag's side, and whether even Man United look interesting whatsoever. Another thing with preseason too is we don't really want to look too kind of keenly into results, but at least we get a bit of a flavor for whether players will become mainstays under a manager at least to start the season with. And I mean, Rashford at 6.5 prices always could be interesting. So that's what I would say. I think I'm gonna stop now here with the stream, guys. It was really lovely to have you guys, and it was really interesting as well to come back to FPL. I'll probably respond to some of these comments as well. So with Brendan, I would say the only thing I don't really love about your team is similar kind of logic where I'd much prefer Salah over De Bruyne. If you're going to go for Haaland, that's fair enough. Mount's an interesting option. I think that this team lacks a little bit of Liverpool, if I'm being honest. Ultimately, they're one of the more dominant teams in the league, and I don't think going zero Liverpool is really a feasible option. I think Liverpool have very, very good games to start the season off too. So if you can kind of spread that money around, especially someone like Bernardo, I really don't think he kind of is worth it at his kind of price point. So I'd think about moving that around, even maybe cutting down from players like Mings and Burn. I much prefer Trippier if we're ever going to touch Newcastle, and I feel like that covers Newcastle enough. Double Newcastle is probably not something I'd like to play with, especially if you don't even have a Liverpool player to start with. And that just might mean you have to kind of move, let's say, Bernardo or Mount into a weaker player, or move, let's say, Martinelli into a weaker player as well, just so you can actually afford a little bit more of a well-balanced team that actually incorporates some of the Liverpool players. That's the kind of issue that I think is mostly plaguing your team. Let's have a look at Crumb's team. Very interesting team, actually. I do very, very like it. Foden, Neto, Luis Diaz, all interesting options. I guess we'd have to kind of understand what the draft is in terms of the bench. But yeah, as long as you kind of have a little bit of a good rotation option for Neto, I think this is a pretty interesting draft for sure. And it covers most of the core tenets that we talk about in terms of at least Liverpool. Clearly, Salah's a bit of a miss there, but I mean, if you're happy to kind of make sure or ensure that your team is very well rounded, then that's fair enough. So the first draft here that I've seen with Maddison, I think I've got a little bit of concerns over Coutinho and Havertz. Maddison, for me, ended the season in very, very fine manner. I feel like Leicester's start of the season games aren't perfect, but if you really have a lot of faith in Maddison kind of continuing his red-hot form from the end of the last season, then that's fine. I just have a slight concerns over Coutinho and Havertz, and I think the main reason, as I said, is because I'm not really sure what Havertz has really shown, you know, as the focal point of a Chelsea team, for me to actually justify him being in my team. I'd much rather someone like a Jesus, for example, who probably will be a very consistent option for an Arsenal team who I would say consistently provide chances for their forwards. We saw, for example, someone like Nketiah, who I don't think many people expected to do well last season. I mean, he was a very, very worthwhile FPL asset and someone who's actually quite consistently scoring goals, just because the Arsenal structure does actually feature, right, scoring goals through their attackers. Whereas if we look at Chelsea in the previous seasons, I mean, we've seen their defenders actually score closer to their strikers than any other team, right? You have players like Reece James and Rudiger who were at one point in the season leading the Chelsea kind of goal scoring table, and that's kind of the question mark I have. And this was even when Lukaku was benched for a large part of the season and Havertz was available to play. So that's kind of my concern. I feel like you're probably a Chelsea fan, maybe a little bit of a suggestion there. I'd probably be happy to go for Mount if you're going to pick one of them, but I'd probably not start with Havertz or Coutinho, I think, who ended the season quite poorly. But that's it for now, guys. We have a lot of time. There's a lot of preseason games to think about, a lot of transfers as well that will impact teams. You know, when we think about Spurs, a team where Doherty was fantastic last season at 5.0 price, no one's really considered him in their drafts too much, I would say. Ultimately, Doherty would be a great pick if Jed Spence doesn't join Spurs, so on and so forth. So these are kind of things to think about. We'll definitely have some 4.5 movements. Andreas is moving to Fulham, it seems like, so we have some kind of bench options there. I would say, as a general tip, definitely start the season out with a strong starting 11. Don't focus too much on your bench. Try to make sure that you're making, like I would say, the first kind of pieces in your draft should always be consistent options that you think will provide the most points. Don't just pick players because they're differentials. You can think about differentials later in the season, but ultimately, what do we know for sure? We kind of know that this Liverpool and City team have been bossing the league for the better half of the last 3 to 4 years. Very consistent in terms of how well their defenders consistently produce points, even some of their focal points on attack as well. City, of course, with a little bit more rotation in the midfield, but we know that there are a lot of fixtures and kind of options in terms of players that consistently produce points, and there's a lot of reason for us to kind of trust that first. In terms of fixtures as well, I'm actually going to produce a YouTube video probably tonight or tomorrow covering the kind of fixture difficulty and what that means for thinking about teams outside of Liverpool and City that are so dominant. Looking at Chelsea, for example, whether their fixture run actually makes a lot of sense, especially in the context of them having so many transfer outgoings like Christensen and Rudiger, and what that means for the defense, and whether it's actually worthwhile to go double Chelsea defense. A lot of people, as we've seen, have gone for Mendy and Chilwell, or both Chilwell and James, which was a very logical option last season, but keep in mind, of course, if you look at Chelsea's defensive metrics, a lot of it was predicated around having Rudiger there. For me, one of those kind of like bright light moments of how impactful Rudiger was just watching that 4-2 Arsenal game, or that 2-4 Arsenal game at Stamford Bridge, where Arsenal kind of blew Chelsea apart, with Rudiger kind of sitting on the sidelines. So that's kind of a thing to think about. How much can some of these players actually provide, if, even though there are such great attacking options within Chilwell or even Perisic, what happens if their defense kind of falls to pieces? Will they provide us the points? And I think Perisic is a good option, because we did see that Spurs team kind of end of the season very well from a defensive aspect. Whereas with Chelsea, it's like, I've got a huge question mark with Rudiger out of the team. Not really a significant replacement, I would say, to argue that their defense is at the same kind of quality as in the previous 2 years. So that's kind of things to think about. All right, take care, guys. You actually don't like the FPL? Absolutely, don't look at the fixture difficulty rating for from the FPL website. I think it's never been good. I don't think that's a really controversial kind of fact. I feel like most people agree with that, but yeah, that's pretty much how I feel about it. I'll definitely post my thoughts on fixture difficulty and how I kind of evaluate the fixtures going forward and what that really means for some of the assets that we have in play. So thank you guys so much. I'll see you guys around.